Black fighters, from different sports who openly came out as gay. Strength. Silence. Survival. For decades, combat sports taught black fighters one rule above all others: never reveal weakness. But what happens when the truth itself becomes the greatest risk? Behind championship belts and Olympic gold lie stories rarely told of fighters who stepped into the ring while hiding who they truly were. Today, on Legends of Black Excellence, we explore black fighters from different sports who openly came out as gay and the cost of that honesty. Watch closely, listen carefully, and then tell us in the comments, did courage save their legacy or redefine it? Emil Griffith. Emil Griffith was not just a champion boxer. He was a man carrying a life far heavier than the belts around his waist. Born in 1938 in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, Griffith rose from poverty to become one of boxing's most skilled and disciplined fighters. During the 1960s, he captured world titles in both the welterweight and middleweight divisions, earning respect for his speed, intelligence, and resilience. To the public, he represented the classic image of strength. Privately, however, his life was shaped by fear, secrecy, and a world that left no room for vulnerability. Griffith's career unfolded during an era when boxing culture was deeply unforgiving. Masculinity was rigidly defined, and any deviation was seen as weakness or worse, danger. As a black man in America during the civil rights era, Griffith already faced racial barriers. Being gay or bisexual added another layer of risk. Though he did not openly speak about his sexuality during his fighting years, it was widely known among those close to him that he lived under constant pressure to hide who he was. Silence was not a choice. It was a survival strategy. The defining tragedy of Griffith's career came in 1962 when he fatally injured fellow boxer Benny Parrott during a televised fight. The incident haunted him for the rest of his life. Later reflections suggest that the taunts directed at Griffith before the fight, reportedly including homophobic slurs, may have fueled the emotional storm that followed. This moment exposed how deeply violence, identity, and repression were intertwined in combat sports at the time. Griffith did not deny responsibility, but he lived with profound remorse, carrying psychological scars long after the physical ones faded. It was only later in life that Emil Griffith publicly acknowledged his bisexuality. In doing so, he gave voice to a reality many fighters had lived but never spoken aloud. His openness came at a time when society was beginning to listen. Yet the pain of earlier years remained. In 1992, Griffith was brutally attacked outside a gay bar in New York City, a reminder that courage does not shield one from hatred. Even so, he continued to speak honestly about his life, emphasizing dignity over bitterness. Emil Griffith's legacy is complex, and that is precisely why it endures. He was a champion in the ring, but his greatest fight was internal, between survival and truth. His story stands as a powerful chapter in the history of black fighters who came out as gay, not for attention, but for peace. In remembering Griffith, we are reminded that true strength is not only measured by punches thrown, but by the courage to live honestly in a world that once demanded silence. Nicola Adams. Nicola Adams did not just win boxing matches, she changed what the sport looked like, who it belonged to, and who was allowed to be seen within it. Born in 1982 in Leeds, England, to a Jamaican father and British mother, Adams grew up in a working-class environment where opportunities were limited and expectations were narrow. From an early age, she gravitated toward boxing, a sport that at the time offered little recognition or support for women. Her rise was slow, demanding patience, discipline, and resilience long before the world was ready to notice. When women's boxing finally debuted at the 2012 London Olympics, Nicola Adams stepped into history. She became the first female Olympic boxing champion, winning gold in the flyweight division. 4 years later, she repeated that achievement at the 2016 Rio Olympics, becoming the first boxer, male or female, to successfully defend an Olympic title in women's boxing. These victories were not only athletic milestones, they validated women's boxing on a global stage and reshaped the sport's future. Adams was suddenly a household name recognized not just for winning but for opening doors. What set Nicola Adams apart was her openness. Throughout her career, she lived publicly as a lesbian athlete, never treating her identity as a secret or a distraction. At a time when many athletes feared that honesty might cost them sponsorships, respect, or opportunities, Adams demonstrated that authenticity could coexist with excellence. She did not frame her sexuality as a statement, it was simply part of who she was. That quiet confidence resonated deeply, especially among older fans who had witnessed decades of silence in combat sports. Adams's journey was not without challenges. Injuries ultimately shortened her professional boxing career, forcing her to retire earlier than expected. Yet even outside the ring, her influence continued. She became a visible advocate for equality in sports, speaking about representation, mental health, and the importance of allowing athletes to exist fully as themselves. Her story contrasted sharply with earlier generations of fighters who were forced into isolation, proving how much and how little had changed. Nicola Adams's legacy extends beyond medals and titles. She represents a turning point in combat sports history where being black, female, and openly gay was no longer incompatible with greatness. Her success did not come from defying her identity, but from embracing it. In the broader story of black fighters who openly came out as gay, Nicola Adams stands as proof that progress is possible not through noise or controversy, but through courage, consistency, and quiet truth. Clarice Agbegnanu. Clarice Agbegnanu grew up in a world where discipline came before comfort and resilience was learned early. Born in 1992 in Rennes, France, to parents of Togolese descent, she was introduced to judo as a child and quickly revealed an uncommon intensity. Judo is a sport built on control rather than chaos, on balance rather than brute force. From the beginning, Agbegnanu showed an instinctive understanding of these principles, rising steadily through the French system before the world began to notice her dominance. By her early 20s, Clarice Agbegnanu had established herself as one of the most formidable judoka of her generation. Competing primarily in the under-63 kg division, she won multiple world championship titles, becoming one of the most decorated athletes in the history of women's judo. Her Olympic journey reached its peak at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, where she captured individual gold and later added team gold, cementing her legacy at the highest level of international competition. These achievements were the result of years of physical sacrifice and mental discipline, not fleeting success. What distinguishes Agbegnanu within the broader history of combat sports is her openness off the mat. Clarice has spoken publicly about her life as a lesbian athlete, never positioning her identity as a point of conflict, but as a fact of her lived experience. In a sport traditionally shaped by hierarchy and tradition, her visibility carried quiet significance. She did not ask for permission to exist fully as herself. She simply did. For many fans, especially those who grew up when silence was the norm, her honesty represented a meaningful shift. Agbegnanu has also been vocal about the pressures placed on elite athletes, particularly women of color. She has spoken openly about mental health burnout and the expectations attached to success. These reflections reveal a multidimensional figure, one who understands that strength is not defined solely by medals. Her willingness to address both triumph and vulnerability has broadened how audiences understand greatness, moving the conversation beyond winning alone. Clarice Agbegnanu's legacy is not confined to judo rankings or Olympic records. She stands as part of a modern chapter in the story of black fighters who openly came out as gay athletes whose honesty did not weaken their careers but clarified them. Her story suggests that progress in combat sports does not always arrive with noise or conflict. Sometimes it arrives through consistency, excellence, and the courage to live openly in a space that once demanded silence. Jade Jones. Jade Jones grew up far from the spotlight of Olympic stadiums. Born in 1993 in Bodelwyddan, Wales, to a family of Jamaican heritage, she discovered Taekwondo as a child while living in Flintshire. At first, it was simply an outlet for energy and discipline. Over time, it became a path toward excellence. Taekwondo demands precision timing and mental calm qualities Jones developed steadily long before the world knew her name. Her breakthrough came at the 2012 London Olympic Games, where she stunned the competition to win gold in the women's plus 67 kg division at just 19 years old. 4 years later, she returned at the 2016 Rio Olympics and defended her title, becoming one of the few athletes in Olympic history to win back-to-back gold medals in Taekwondo. These victories placed her among the sport's elite and made her one of Britain's most successful combat athletes of her generation. To many viewers, especially older audiences, Jones represented discipline, national pride, and quiet determination. Equally significant was how openly she lived her personal life. Jade Jones has long been public about being a lesbian athlete, never framing her sexuality as a headline or controversy. In a combat sport that traditionally values restraint and conformity, her openness carried meaning precisely because it was not dramatic. She competed, won, and represented her country without hiding who she was. For fans who remembered eras when athletes felt forced into secrecy, this visibility marked a clear cultural shift. Jones's career was not defined solely by triumph. Like many elite fighters, she faced injuries, intense pressure, and the challenge of maintaining form over multiple Olympic cycles. Her early exit at the Tokyo 2020 Games was a reminder of how unforgiving elite competition can be, even for champions. Yet that moment did not erase her legacy. Instead, it highlighted the reality that greatness is measured across an entire career, not a single performance. Jade Jones stands as an important figure in the broader story of Black fighters who openly came out as gay. Her impact lies not in confrontation, but in consistency. She showed that excellence in combat sports does not require silence about identity. By pairing Olympic dominance with personal honesty, Jones helped redefine what strength looks like in modern athletics. Her story speaks quietly but powerfully to a generation that understands progress is often made not through noise, but through example. Orlando Cruz. Orlando Cruz grew up in Puerto Rico with boxing woven into everyday life. Born in 1981 in San Juan, he came from an Afro-Puerto Rican background where the sport offered both escape and identity. Like many fighters from the island, Cruz learned early that boxing rewarded discipline, sacrifice, and emotional restraint. As a young amateur, he showed promise and carried national pride into the ring, eventually representing Puerto Rico on international stages before turning professional. Cruz built a respectable professional career in the super featherweight division, earning regional titles and steadily climbing the rankings. His style was technical rather than reckless, built on footwork, timing, and patience. By the early 2010s, he was no longer an outsider. He was a contender working toward a legitimate world title opportunity. In 2013, he challenged for the WBO super featherweight world title, a moment that placed him on boxing's global radar. Win or lose, Cruz had already earned his place among the sport's elite competitors. What made Orlando Cruz historically significant, however, was not only his record. In 2012, while still actively competing, he publicly came out as gay. At that time, no openly gay male boxer had ever done so while pursuing a world championship. Boxing, perhaps more than any other sport, was steeped in rigid ideas of masculinity. For a Black and Latino fighter to speak openly about his sexuality carried enormous personal and professional risk. Cruz's announcement was calm, direct, and deliberate. He framed it not as a challenge, but as a statement of honesty. The response was mixed. Some offered support, others reacted with silence, and a few with open hostility. Yet Cruz continued to fight, train, and compete at the highest level. His presence in the ring after coming out carried symbolic weight. He did not ask the sport to change overnight. Instead, he demanded respect through performance. By refusing to retreat into secrecy, Cruz exposed how deeply fear and tradition had shaped boxing culture for generations. Orlando Cruz's legacy is not defined by championships alone. He stands as a turning point in combat sports history, a black Afro-Puerto Rican fighter who chose truth over protection at the peak of his career. His courage expanded the boundaries of what was considered possible in boxing. In the broader story of black fighters who openly came out as gay, Cruz represents progress earned the hard way through resilience, dignity, and the willingness to step into the ring as his full, authentic self. Nyla Rose. Nyla Rose entered this world of professional wrestling carrying more than athletic ambition. Born in 1982 in Washington, D.C., she is of African American and Native American heritage, and from early on learned what it meant to live at the intersection of visibility and expectation. Wrestling, with its physical demands and exaggerated ideas of power, has long celebrated a narrow definition of strength. For Rose, stepping into that world meant confronting not only opponents in the ring, but assumptions that existed far beyond it. Before joining a global stage, Rose spent years working on independent circuits, refining her craft and building resilience. Professional wrestling is as much about storytelling as it is about physicality, and Rose learned to command both. When All Elite Wrestling AEW launched in 2019, she became one of its earliest signings. In February 2020, Nyla Rose made history by winning the AEW Women's World Championship, becoming the first openly transgender champion in a major U.S. wrestling promotion. For longtime fans of combat-style sports entertainment, it was a moment that marked a clear departure from the past. What makes Nyla Rose's story especially relevant to the broader discussion of black fighters who openly came out as gay or LGBT is her openness from the start. Rose has never hidden her identity as a transgender woman and openly LGBT athlete. Rather than framing her presence as a statement, she treated it as a fact, something that existed alongside her talent, not in place of it. In a genre historically defined by hypermasculinity, her visibility challenged decades of assumptions without demanding spectacle. Rose's career has not been free of controversy. As with many pioneers, her success sparked debate, criticism, and at times hostility. Yet she continued to perform at the highest level, earning respect through consistency and professionalism. She also became known for her wit and self-awareness, using humor and honesty to diffuse tension rather than escalate it. For older audiences accustomed to eras when such identities were erased entirely, her approach offered a new model strength paired with composure. Nyla Rose's legacy is still being written, but its significance is already clear. She stands as part of a modern generation of black fighters who chose openness in spaces once defined by exclusion. Her story is not about provocation, it is about presence. By succeeding without denying who she is, Rose expanded the boundaries of representation in combat sports entertainment. In doing so, she reminded audiences that courage does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it simply refuses to disappear. Anthony Bowens. Anthony Bowens grew up in Nutley, New Jersey, far from the bright lights of sold-out arenas. Born in 1990, he was an athlete from an early age, excelling in track and field before discovering professional wrestling. That background shaped his style: explosive, disciplined, and precise. Wrestling, however, was not simply a sport. It was a culture steeped in exaggerated masculinity and long-standing stereotypes. For a young black man with ambitions in that world, the pressure to conform was constant. Bowens entered professional wrestling through independent circuits where success depended as much on resilience as talent. He trained relentlessly, refining both his in-ring ability and his presence on the microphone. His breakthrough came when he signed with All Elite Wrestling AEW, a promotion positioning itself as an alternative to old traditions. As part of the tag team, the acclaimed Bowens quickly stood out not just for his athleticism, but for his confidence and chemistry with his partner. The team's rise was steady, built on audience connection rather than instant fame. In 2022, Anthony Bowens reached a career-defining milestone when the Acclaimed won the AEW World Tag Team Championship. They would go on to become multiple-time champions, including a widely recognized title victory at AEW Grand Slam, one of the company's flagship events. These accomplishments placed Bowens among the most visible performers in modern professional wrestling. For older fans who had followed the industry for decades, his success represented a noticeable shift in who could thrive at the top. What truly distinguishes Bowens within the broader history of combat-style sports is his openness. Anthony Bowens is openly gay, and he did not wait until retirement to speak his truth. He came out publicly while still building his career, choosing honesty in an industry that had rarely welcomed it. Importantly, his identity was not used as a storyline or a spectacle. It existed alongside his work, not instead of it. That balance allowed audiences to adjust not through confrontation, but through familiarity. Anthony Bowens' legacy is still unfolding, but its meaning is already clear. He stands as part of a generation of black fighters who proved that openness does not weaken credibility in physically demanding sports entertainment. By succeeding on major stages while living openly as a gay man, Bowens challenged decades of unspoken rules. His story is not about defiance for its own sake. It is about normalizing truth. In the larger narrative of black fighters who openly came out as gay, Anthony Bowens represents progress measured not in noise but in consistency, respect, and earned success. Darren Young, Fred Rosser. Darren Young, 10th Atla Fred Rosser, grew up in Uniondale, New York, with dreams shaped by athletic competition and performance. Born in 1983, he excelled in multiple sports before finding his place in professional wrestling, a world defined by spectacle, physical punishment, and rigid expectations of masculinity. Wrestling was not simply about winning matches, it was about projecting an image. For a black man entering that space, the pressure to appear invulnerable was both constant and unforgiving. Rosser signed with WWE in the mid-2000s and gradually carved out a role for himself on one of the biggest stages in sports entertainment. As part of tag teams and singles competition, he earned respect as a reliable, hard-working performer. While he was never positioned as the face of the company, his presence was consistent, and his career spanned an era when WWE's reach extended into millions of households worldwide. To many longtime fans, Darren Young was a familiar figure, steady, disciplined, and professional. In 2013, everything changed. During a casual interview, Darren Young publicly came out as gay, becoming the first openly gay male wrestler actively competing on the WWE roster. The moment was not planned as a publicity event. It was spontaneous, honest, and deeply personal. In an industry where silence had long been the norm, Rosser's openness carried historic weight. He did not frame his announcement as a challenge or demand for recognition, he simply told the truth. The response was significant. WWE publicly supported him, and fellow wrestlers, including veterans, spoke out in solidarity. Still, the cultural shift was not instantaneous. Wrestling's fan base, shaped by decades of tradition, needed time to adjust. Rosser continued performing, proving that his identity did not alter his commitment or ability. In later years, he would speak openly about the emotional toll of hiding and the relief that came with honesty, especially for younger athletes watching from the sidelines. Darren Young's legacy is not defined by championships, but by timing and courage. He came out while still under contract, still performing, and still subject to public judgment. In doing so, he opened a door that had remained closed for generations. Within the broader story of black fighters who openly came out as gay, Fred Rosser represents a critical transition from silence to visibility. His story reminds us that progress in combat sports is often quiet, uncomfortable, and gradual, but once begun, it cannot be undone. Fallon Fox. Fallon Fox did not enter combat sports seeking controversy. Born in 1975 in Toledo, Ohio, Fox served in the U.S. Navy before discovering mixed martial arts later in life. She is of African American heritage and trained seriously in grappling and striking at a time when women's MMA was still fighting for legitimacy. Discipline, structure, and persistence defined her path long before the public knew her name. Fox competed professionally in women's MMA during the early 2010s, primarily in regional promotions. Her fighting style leaned heavily on strength and ground control, reflecting years of dedicated training. In 2013, she became the subject of international attention, not because of a title fight, but because she publicly disclosed that she is a transgender woman. This made her one of the first openly transgender athletes competing in professional MMA, placing her at the center of a debate far larger than sport itself. What followed was intense and often polarizing. Supporters emphasized that Fox had been medically cleared under existing athletic regulations and had followed required procedures, including hormone therapy, before competing. Critics raised concerns about fairness and safety in women's combat sports. Fox herself rarely escalated the debate. Instead, she spoke calmly about her right to compete, her respect for opponents, and her desire to be judged as an athlete, not a headline. For many older viewers, the discussion echoed past moments in sports history when inclusion challenged long-standing traditions. Fox's MMA career was relatively short, but its impact was lasting. She did not dominate the sport, nor did she claim to represent all transgender athletes. What she did represent was visibility at a moment when few existed. In a sport built on physical confrontation and rigid gender norms, simply stepping into the cage required uncommon resolve. The criticism she faced, much of it personal, revealed how unprepared the sports world still was for such conversations. Fallon Fox's place in the broader story of Black fighters who openly came out as LGBT is complex, and that complexity matters. Her legacy is not defined by wins or losses, but by presence. She forced combat sports to confront questions it had long avoided without demanding simple answers. For audiences who value fairness, tradition, and honesty, Fox's story remains a reminder that progress is rarely comfortable. Sometimes it arrives through individuals willing to stand still under pressure and let society decide what it truly believes about courage, identity, and inclusion. Yusuf Mack. Yusuf Mack grew up in Philadelphia, a city where boxing has long been a path out of hardship. Born in 1980, Mack found structure and purpose in the gym at a young age. Boxing offered discipline, respect, and a sense of identity, qualities especially important for a young Black man navigating limited opportunities. Over time, he developed into a powerful southpaw, known for his toughness and willingness to face elite opponents. Mack's professional career spanned more than a decade. He competed primarily in the light heavyweight division and earned regional titles, including the NABF Light Heavyweight Championship. His dedication culminated in 2011 when he challenged the legendary Vladimir Klitschko for the world heavyweight title. Although he lost by knockout, simply reaching that stage placed Mack among a rare group of fighters who had stood across from one of boxing's dominant champions. To fans, his story was familiar. A hard-working contender who earned respect through perseverance rather than hype. Everything changed in 2015 when Yusuf Mack publicly came out as gay. The announcement came after a deeply personal and public episode that forced him to confront years of denial and internal conflict. Mack spoke openly about having lived a double life shaped by fear of rejection from family, fans, and the boxing community. In a sport where masculinity is tightly policed, his admission was not just personal, it was cultural. Very few male boxers had ever spoken so openly about their sexuality. The reaction was mixed but revealing. Some expressed support, while others responded with judgment or ridicule. Mack himself acknowledged mistakes in how his story became public, but he never retreated from the truth of who he was. Instead, he began speaking about the emotional toll of hiding the pressure placed on Black male fighters and the lack of safe spaces within boxing. His honesty exposed a reality long ignored, that many athletes survive not just physical punishment, but deep psychological strain. Yusuf Mack's legacy is not defined by championships or perfect decisions. It is defined by vulnerability in a sport that rarely allows it. In the broader narrative of black fighters who openly came out as gay, Mack represents the cost of silence and the difficult relief that can follow truth. His story challenges audiences to reconsider what strength really means. Not just the ability to endure blows in the ring, but the courage to face oneself outside of it. The stories of these black fighters remind us that courage does not end when the final bell rings. For Emil Griffith, Nicola Adams, Clarice Agbegnanu, and others, the hardest battles were often fought outside the spotlight against silence, tradition, and fear. Their openness did not erase their greatness, it reshaped it. But this raises a question worth debating. Should combat sports continue to judge strength only by physical dominance, or is the courage to live openly part of true excellence? As traditions evolve, the future of fighting may depend on how honestly we define what a champion really is.